a comedian. People can hear my air quotes, that made some joke about how Puerto Rico is an island of trash in the ocean, and he had made a watermelon joke about black people. I mean, it was just horrific. And there were a couple of statements, Rick Scott, a couple other people, like tisking that because they know that the political vulnerability of this, just like trashing Puerto Ricans, and there are 400,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, and not even doing the tongue-in-cheek type racist joking stuff that Trump and Vance like to do. You know, it's just like flat, like straight at it. Puerto Ricans are trash. All right, we're back with Bill Kristol. I want to talk more about MSG and some of the recent polls, but man, much to chew on there. I thought JVL was dark. That was a pretty ominous report about the state of the level of alarm from Bob Kagan. But what were your reactions to both, to what he had to say?
I mean, Bob is usually has not been, I've known him a long time, an alarmist, because he's a historian and he always takes a somewhat longer view. And if you do that, you often say, well, we'll get past this. So at times when I've been, can you believe our foreign policy, how bad it is? Bob has been a little bit of the, look, America always takes its time to react, unfortunately, and we pay a price for it, but eventually we kind of come around. That's one lesson he takes from a lot of our history. But the fact that he's so alarmed is alarming. He's not an alarmist by nature. He's been right about this from the beginning. He wrote that piece in 2016 in the Post, and he used the word fascism. He said it was an American style of fascism. It's not going to look exactly, obviously, like Italy or anything like that. But he saw it early. And I mean, the degree to which it has progressed is obviously startling 9 years later. Nothing derailed it. January 6th, the loss in 2020 didn't derail it. January 6th didn't derail it. The indictments, God knows that didn't derail it. But the wildly, increasingly evident authoritarianism and radicalization of the movement hasn't derailed it. And now we see in these last days of the 2024 campaign, the respectable institutions capitulating more quickly as the movement gets more radical and more distasteful and more contrary to the American tradition, right? I mean, that is very striking, so that it's bad. I think he's right about that. It's you would think if someone had told you what's going to go in this direction and this and this, and these are the kind of speakers you're going to have at the actual closing rally of the presidential candidate of one of the two major parties in the United States, and we're going to have Stephen Miller, arguably Trump's top policy aide in general, not just on immigration, saying that, what was it? America is for Americans
and Americans only.
I mean, unbelievable sort of statement. And if I could say this as a matter of personal privilege, almost for a Jew to say such a thing, I find just somewhat sickening. But, it's fine. Let them keep out the Jews in 1940. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's only for us Americans who are already here. Which ones, when they were already here? When Stephen Miller's great-grandparents wanted to come over, should they have just been left to wherever they were in Eastern Europe? I mean, the whole thing is sickening. And the fact that there isn't more of a reaction is striking. Not only not more of a reaction against, I don't know, was anyone jumping ship? Has there been a single statement, except for a couple of Republicans nervous that they might lose some Latino votes in their states?
Yeah, no, they were mad about, So there was one of the other clips I was playing. I'm not going to play it because it's just not even worth playing. But there's a comedian. People can hear my air quotes if you're just on audio. That made some joke about how Puerto Rico is an island of trash in the ocean, and he had made a watermelon joke about black people. I mean, it was just horrific. And there were a couple of statements, Rick Scott and a couple other people, like tisking that because they know that the political vulnerability of this, just like trashing Puerto Ricans, and there are 400,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, and like not even doing the tongue-in-cheek type racist joking stuff that Trump and Vance like to do. It's just like flat, like straight at it. Puerto Ricans are trash. So they did put out some statements on that. But to me, the interesting thing about the speakers at the rally, and this was ties to what Bob was talking about too, about the Wall Street Journal, is like Mike Johnson was really the only one who you could call something like recognizably a traditional Republican, right? I mean, there's things about Mike Johnson that are weird as well, but like his remarks, the types of issues that he focused on, like the final 8 speakers were like Elon, Tulsi, and RFK Jr., who were all Democrats 2 minutes ago. It was JD, and his populist demagogy. It was the Trump family members, speaking of like a third world authoritarian oligarchy. It was like another business leader who was just totally off his rocker, and then a couple of wrestling celebrities. And then in Trump's remarks, I wrote about this in the article Friday about my pitch to Nikki Haley voters, to traditional Republicans, to vote for Kamala this one time. And if people haven't read that yet and shared that with your friend or uncle or whatever who might fit this bill, please go do that. But it's like, even the message of Trump doesn't have any of that anymore. Like in 2016, he mixed the Trumpy stuff with the old school Republican stuff. Like his message now is basically tariffing people, mass deportations now, targeting foes, domestic oil production, which is your one traditional plank, I guess, for the oil men out there, and like that, and grievances, cultural grievances. Like that's it. That's what his message. That is his stated message, his on message right now, and so to have that be the core message and have it be surrounded by this kind of parade of freaks, I think it's startling, as Bob said, that the Wall Street Journal types are going along with it, and it's also very telling about what the administration will look like who will be in the room, and it's these people.
And the other thing that Miller said, I guess almost all of them said, actually, Vance said, was, and incidentally, they wanted him dead, right? There was this huge, they with the, what is that, a third person plural without an antecedent, since they can't specify it, since it's perfectly evident the assassination attempt was by some guy who was not part of any Democratic or deep state but nonetheless, all the Trump, almost all the speakers said that. And so they're willing to stir up, genuine anger, obviously, and hatred, and with just a flat out lie, and also one that would imply a massive conspiracy into the deep state and so forth, and the enemies of the people, the Democrats, and the enemies within, and it's all laying the groundwork for, I don't know, I'm with Bob, the kinds of authoritarian actions we could see, maybe not on January 21st, 2025, but 6 months in, 18 months in, if there's some quote provocations that give him an excuse to do things, I think are much different from anything we saw in the first term, certainly, and probably different from things we've really even been thinking about.
Yeah, and the other thing that you have also is all of the election fraud stuff. And one of the striking things to me standing outside with the Volk was just like how many casual overheard convos I had. Like, I wasn't like quizzing people. Like I was just kind of like moving around, and like I'd talk a little bit to some people, or I'd just stand there and like overhear conversations. It's just like matter of fact, it was stolen from us in 2020. We're not gonna let them do this again. And again, not the crazy people, like people that also had, their Charles Schwab app on their phone, like people that were dressed and talking about work. I was overhearing a conversation between like a younger guy and a guy. It wasn't like a father-son, it was maybe an uncle situation or something. And he's giving him work advice and business advice, and then that was seamlessly transitioning into like concerns about election fraud and how it was taken in 2020, right? Like matter of fact, and that to me, even in a loss, we have this danger that even in a loss for Trump, we have this acute danger for a few months at least that Kagan was talking about violence. And I want to play one other clip from the rally from Tucker Carlson on this point.
It's going to be pretty tough for them 10 days from now to look in the eye to America with a straight face. It's going to be pretty hard to look at us and say, you know what, Kamala Harris, she got 85 million votes because she's just so impressive. As the first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president, it was just a groundswell of popular support. And anyone who thinks otherwise is just a freak or a criminal. At this stage of the game, after 9 years of listening to their lies and finding every single one of them totally false, no, it's not safe and effective, and no, she's not impressive. It's very hard for me to believe the rest of us are going to say, you know what, Joe Scarborough, you're right. You're right. She won fair and square because she's just so impressive. I don't think so. And to me, that is liberation. It's the freedom to say what's obviously true as a free man and not a slave. And I just want to say thank you, Donald Trump, for that.
So it's like a triple layer cake of awful there. You've got the racism, you have the the Trump culty praise from somebody that you know privately said he despises Trump in text messages and that Fox deposition. And then you have just this laying the groundwork for January 6th 2.0.
I think that last point's really important, and just for people who focus on it, where does that 85 million come from? Well, Biden got 81 million votes, I believe, in 2020. If Harris were to win, or even not win, but runs kind of where it looks like she's running at 48, 49%, at least in the popular vote, she'll probably be a little bit higher turnout. She'll probably get a few, maybe doesn't quite get Biden's percentage. She'll probably get in the ballpark of 85 million votes. She could well get more votes than Biden got just because of turnout, even if she doesn't do better as a percentage. And so Carlson's pretty carefully laying the groundwork to say it's incredible. It can't be the case. It can't be true that Kamala Harris got 85 million votes, which is probably what she's going to get. So it is just flat out laying the groundwork for denying the election results and leading to what? Violence or a coup, I suppose, or getting Republican legislators to, there may not be enough Republican legislators in the key states to overturn these results. And if they're Democratic legislators and Democratic governors, as there are in some of these states, then you're talking about civil unrest there, or you're talking about going to the House in some complicated way and trying to get them to refuse to accept these results. I mean, it's so the degree to which, I mean, on the one hand, they're all such buffoons, and so, it's so childish.
It's like Hulk Hogan can't even rip off his shirt anymore.
Right.
It's like Hulk is like limping up there on the stage, doing just this campy down market imitation of his former self, and he's like trying to rip his shirt and he can't even do it anymore. It took him like 3 tries. It is really obscene, like absurd. Like the scene is absurd.
I mean, Kamala Harris had that line at the convention that was so accurate. I think she said something like, in many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man, but the consequences of putting him in the White House are very serious. And it's a little hard to get your head around that for a minute. I mean, and I think he gets away with a lot because he's so unserious in a funny way, the whole shtick and the routine and all that. But the consequences are serious. That was correct. One should not lose sight of the danger when one is struck by the idiocy of it all. As our friend Charlie Sykes used to say, if a clown with a flamethrower still has a flamethrower. And in this case, the flamethrower is the key thing to focus on, not the clownishness, I think.
Yeah. And at some level, I actually think the clownishness is important because, again, and I talked about this on Friday in the monologue about Trump and respond to what Ezra Klein had said about how the dangerous part of him is he has this disinhibition and that he had people around him that were more inhibited, that prevented some things the first time. Like none of those people are around.
Yeah.
Like none of, and it just isn't like, it's important to realize that the crazies and the clowns and the extremists will be in the inner circle this time. I mean, and they were at times last time too, and it was, but it was like a mix. I think it was more of this just mix of like you had Reince Priebus and these traditional Republicans, then you had these generals, and he brought in a couple business guys like Rex Tillerson, and then you had Bannon, and what I mean? Like you had this like there's no mix left this time. It's just the crazies and the clowns.
And for those respectable types who they might suck in, they will have had to have bent the knee and made clear they're not going to do what Mattis and John Bolton and Gary Cohn did or tried to do sometimes, or even Jeff Sessions. I mean, the degree to which we just take it for granted. Of course, he's going to fire the special counsel. Of course, he's going to have an attorney general who's going to turn the whole Justice Department to his private litigation arm. The notion, I mean, Jeff Sessions in the Trump first term recused himself because he was told by the career attorneys at Justice that he had to do that. It was the right thing to do. And then Rosenstein appointed Mueller and so forth. I mean, that is such a different universe from the one we'll be living in if Trump wins. And that is something that the Wall Street journals of the world simply refuse to even confront. It's evidently true. And they pretend that, no, it'll be kind of like the first term, some distasteful stuff, but basically it'll be fine.
I've got a counter view. This is just across the transom here. So you get to react to it live. It's from our friends at No Labels. No Labels writes this: "Calm down, America. our founders put in a system of checks and balances that will be guardrails for whomever gets elected, whether you like it or not. There are no communists or fascists being elected. We live in an emotional social media world where everything is exaggerated.
Our founders were very worried about demagogues taking over, and they did try to put in guardrails as much as possible. And they say several times in the Federalist Papers, at the end of the day, you do depend on the public to have some basic common sense or and virtue, to use a word they use, to resist demagogues. They also they didn't. Some of these institutions and guardrails have been very badly eroded over the years. So that's just disingenuous, don't you think? I mean, do they believe that, or are they just saying that as a way of, I don't know what?
I mean, it's who the hell knows? Mark Penn could be writing it, who's clearly for Trump. No, I think that I think you can never go wrong with questioning the motives of the folks over at No Labels.
But it gives all these business types. I was in New York last week. Very nice business people, actually, and responsible. Nothing like actually Elon Musk or even Bezos or anything like that. But look, they're living there in their own world. They've got to run their corporations, and they're thinking, what if Trump wins? And so we talked a little bit about that in terms of some of the policies, tariffs and stuff. But it's also very clear they're not going to fight. No, I'm not sure they should. I mean, what does it even mean for them to fight if you're running some big, financial services firm? They're going to hire people to lobby the Trump administration. They're going to be an unbelievable amount of money sloshing around, even more than for the last several years in MAGA world. I mean, again, we haven't.
Money's going to be sloshing around, and his whole economic plan is just going to be arbitrary tariffs.
Right.
You got to try to get in. And it'll be a crony capitalism palooza.
Yep. Yeah, Edgar makes this point well, and Andrew makes this point well in Morning Shots, that the tariffs thing is very bad economic policy, but it's also just an invitation to grift and graft and payoffs and sucking up and as you say, to kind of a corporatism that was one reason why people reacted against tariffs. And so, you know what? Let's just have people pay taxes.
All right, I want to move to the political side of this. Kamala is giving a speech at the Ellipse on Tuesday. I have some thoughts about that as a strategic move. I'm wondering what yours are.
I'm sort of uncertain. What do you think?
I think that they're doing it for attention. And so I'm for it for this reason. Kamala gives a pretty standard stump speech when she's out there. It's a good stump speech, but that's what she gives. So it's hard to make news, right? If you're her. And this was, I think, the point for the rally in Texas. You wanted to get abortion into the news. You wanted to get Beyonce into the news. You have an event in Texas with Beyonce, right? And I think that so I think that like the tactic side of this is pretty obvious. It's the comms team trying to say, okay, how can we get ourselves some share of attention here as we head into the final stretch? The strategy side, I think it will depend more on what she does, how she talks about all of this. I continue to think that her job for the last week or so that we have here is one, continuing to do everything possible to highlight why Trump is unacceptable to the Nikki Haley voter types who still are wavering. Like, you want before they go in, you want the last thing that they remember to be the thing that they hate about Trump. And so I think this is a useful tool in that. I think there's a second goal that is continuing to kind of introduce new like she just has this challenge that Trump doesn't still, which is to people that aren't paying attention. She's still trying to introduce herself to some small segment of the electorate, and I think that is related to the third thing, which is turning out the core constituencies, which is where the celeb stuff comes in. So that's her job in the ground game. So to me, like that speech is aimed at that first category, and I'm sure she'll have some other things that she's going to do that aims at the other two.
Yeah, I basically agree. She needs to read, and speechwriters need to read your excellent piece from Friday, and I'm sure they will, on how to win over as a way to what to say to the sort of doubting Haley voters out there. There's a bit of a silly, I think, and disingenuous sometimes backlash against, don't focus on Trump. I mean, you should be still selling your, healthcare plan or something like this. I don't know, a week out, they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on their own on her middle class agenda and on her own middle class roots, which is good. And they raised her from, she took over down 3 or 4 because of Biden, and she went to about maybe +3. Maybe now it slaps down to about +1 because they kind of ran its course, I would say. At the end of the day, you do need to alarm people about Trump. Maybe not using terms like fascist if people don't think those, that Americans quite get that. Just explain concretely what he will do in terms of our liberties and freedoms. And that's, God knows, should be enough. And just quote some of the things he said about using the military and about deporting 15 million people and about how proud he is of the Supreme Court that gave us Dobbs, and he'll have a chance to make more Supreme Court appointments. I don't think this doesn't need to be rocket science. And I don't even have a strong view on which of the list of things you could cite would be most effective. They can test that. I do think it's a certain amount, but I am struck that there are some on the Democratic side, this one super PAC, Future Forward, are busy telling the New York Times that they're not really certain about this attack on Trump. And if only, what tests best is really helping people more with their senior care. So that does test well because you know what? Everyone likes that. Of course it tests well, but Trump himself can just say, I'm for that too, which is what he said incidentally at the rally. And it's not a real test. And the degree to which, if I could just complain about some of our new Democratic friends, could they, if they're running the $700 million super PAC that Biden blessed, and then Harris, to her credit, didn't shake up, took it over, kept the same people there, put Anita Dunn on the payroll there from the Biden White House. They've gone ahead and spent hundreds of millions of dollars on ads. They've been treated respectfully, left alone, so far as I can tell by the Harris campaign. I know how much good they've done, honestly. And they can't shut up for the week before the election, and whatever little stupid internal disputes they're having or whatever Biden resentments they're still nursing months later, they can't just keep to themselves. I really find it kind of astonishing.
Yeah, we're going to put out this memo from the PAC. The PAC whose ads aren't that good, by the way. We've mentioned this several times.
Right.
They're just kind of boring. I don't know who they're for. And I'm sure to me, I'm going to sound like this is when Charles Barkley goes on NBA on TNT after the basketball games. He's like, I'm not so sure about this analytics. Sometimes I talk about that. But the thing is, testing basketball and testing television advertisements is a different ball of wax, because you're basing your message testing on these ads. Just to show behind the curtain with people for a little bit, is like, you have people that are watching the ads. A lot of times it's like people that are like playing some sort of game online, like you're playing a video game or something, and like to get to the next level, you've got to like watch an ad and tell the person whether you like it or not. And it's like you're assuming a number of things, right? Well, one, that people know what actually persuades them, right? Number two, that people are really paying attention that closely, right? And it's out of context. Like, you can't run a real experiment. It's not like a basketball game where you just played a basketball game and now we've had an experiment. You can't run 100 elections and do ads with fascism ads and then ads with middle class ads and see which time she does better, right? So a lot of this is a little bit of pseudoscience. But so they have the little pseudoscience, and they're going to the media to complain about what the campaign is doing. I agree. It's stupid and wrong. And I just don't, I think that there's certain things you can learn from testing. And I've got friends that do message testing. I've been asking them about what it's showing. And, one of them says to me that, like, if you put the word Nazi in there, it just tanks. And that makes sense to me, like, intellectually. Like, people, like, they're like, okay, really, he's a Nazi, you know what I mean? And also, anybody that thinks that he might be a Nazi is already voting against him, or is a Nazi themselves and is already for him, right? So it's kind of like, is that persuasive a message? So I like, there are things you can learn from this. But yeah, I'm with you. This notion that, like, okay, well, 9 out of 10 voters liked the very generic ad about how they would pay less for health care. And only 8 of the 10 voters liked the ad that mentioned that Trump might be a fascist. So we should just do the boring ad about healthcare. I don't know. I'm not sure it's as clear cut as that. And I think that with their $700 million, they should run what they think is right and let the campaign do some stuff. And I think a mix of messages is really probably right.
Which is what they've done and what the campaign has done. And they've spent all in there much, much more on the positive and healthcare messages than on the Trump dictatorship message, let's call it. And John Kelly, there's a very modest buy apparently promoting him, even though there is data that we've seen it, that having Republican messengers and people who worked for Trump as the messengers of Trump's danger does work better than a generic statement. If you have an ad with some voiceless, nameless narrator just saying Donald Trump is very dangerous, people think, oh, what's that? If it's John Kelly, was Donald Trump's chief of staff, he's a retired 4-star Marine general. Here are his words. That does seem to have an effect. But anyway, they test this. The Harris people make up their own mind. I've got to say, all in though, I just want to say this as we approach the end. She's not a perfect candidate. There's some things in the campaign I would have done differently. She's run a good campaign, and it's been a good campaign, and the campaign has been a good campaign. They hit the key things they had to do: the launch, the convention speech, the debate, very impressively. I'd say in all three cases, incidentally. Not every campaign pulls that off. Certainly not a campaign that had to get organized after Biden dragged his feet on whatever it was, July 20th, I guess, when they got out. So the campaign has done a good job. The candidate has done a good job. The super PAC, I don't know. You can't prove the opposite of what would the world be if they hadn't spent the $700 million they raised. But it's not so obvious to me that the super PAC has done such a great job. And there's the super PAC in the New York Times whining and complaining and covering their ass ahead of time in case Harris might lose. So I'm just annoyed at them. Maybe you noticed that. I don't know. Yes.
I agree. No, that's great. That's a good rant. That reminds me of the rants I used to do about the Jeff Rowe, Ron DeSantis super PAC. The media also loves talking to fancy strategists at these things and like treating them like they're really Svengalis. And I'm like, Jeff Rowe spent 9 figures to watch his candidate lose half his vote share from when he started. like how great could their message testing have really been? Anyway, final thing, I want to talk just briefly about the Senate. There are 2 New York Times polls out, and the state of play is essentially this: that it would take something very surprising, I think, for the Democrats to win the Montana Senate race right now, even though John Tester is a good candidate. It's just the nature of our polarized times. And so if that is the case and the Republicans win in Montana and West Virginia, that puts them at 51 senators. To get back to 50-50, the Democrats would need to win either Texas or Nebraska. The Times, Siena, has a poll out this morning that has Trump up 10 in Texas, but Cruz only up 4. And then in this Nebraska Senate race, I've been trying to get this guy on, so we'll see if we can make it work for the election. But he's an independent candidate running against the Republican Deb Fischer. Deb Fischer is only up by 2. And this guy's kind of like a working class, kind of populist independent type. A little bit mansiony, a little bit testerish, kind of like a union guy that's running, but is more moderate on cultural issues. And Dan Osborne, and he's run a very good race, and that race looks very close, and might be a potential out. Not for Democrats, since he would be an independent. He said he wouldn't caucus with Democrats, but it would be a way to keep the Republican number down to 50. So anyway, I don't know if you have any final thoughts on the Senate races, but just wanted to bring that up.
I mean, these things sometimes do surprise, and I think they're a little less baked in than presidential numbers for obvious reasons. People don't know the challengers in the case certainly of Osborne in Nebraska, to some degree, but all red in Texas. So I'm a little more open to the notion that we could have surprises in both those races, actually. And even Tester, incidentally. Tester's closing, it looks to me like, and he's got problems. And Tester's a very impressive candidate who, is it out of the question that he pulls even and wins? I don't think so. So I would say just in general, I don't know why I feel this now. I talked to too many people late last week and they were all down in the dumps. So I guess I got slightly down in the dumps. But since this is our next to last discussion before the election, I'm actually slightly optimistic. I don't know. I just feel like there will be some revulsion among some voters against Trump and Trumpism. And at the end of the day, if you look at the actual polls and the actual swing states, they're even, basically. They're really almost totally even. But Harris is as much ahead by 1 point as in some states as Trump is ahead by 1 point in other states. And I see no reason why the late break shouldn't be even tiny bit to Harris, or a tiny bit to Harris. And I think she could well win. I actually do think she's going to win.
That's a great place to leave it. I'm with you. I'm an emotional roller coaster. I said this on the post game that we did last night. After the Madison Square Garden event for members. If you're not a member, this is your moment. The Bulwark.com/subscribe. We had Bob Kagan on at the top. I guess some people might have some extra walking around money after they've canceled their Amazon Prime and Washington Post subscription. So you could come join us for some of these members only events that we have. But the point I am an emotional roller coaster because that's just my nature. And I'm also upset just about the fact that we even are here at all, right? And like, so even if she does win narrowly, I'm going to be happy for a minute, but I'm going to be filled with rage at the fact that we even had to do this, that had to sweat this out. That said, like, as Pluff has said, and as anybody, like, the race hasn't moved in a month. Just hasn't. Like, you can look at micro adjustments or whatever, but she's had a narrow lead with a narrow path through the blue wall, maybe with North Carolina, and that's been how the race has looked, like, essentially since after the debate. And it felt differently then because, it felt like the momentum might have been going up, and right, like, and maybe the sky was the limit or whatever, but like, just because it felt differently then doesn't mean that the race was different. Like, the race is what it is. It's very close. It's narrow. She has a clear path. God willing, she holds on in the states that she needs for the clear path. But that's kind of, I think that's what the state of play is going to be like until next Tuesday, or maybe next Thursday or Friday. So buckle up, stick around with us for that. Bill, thank you for your uplifting, final note. We will be back. This is not our last. We will have one more repartee before Election Day, and we'll be back here tomorrow with another edition of the Bulwark Podcast. We'll see you all then. Peace.